الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا وعظيمنا وحبيب قلوبنا وشفيع نفوسنا أبي القاسم محمد. طب القلوب ودوائها ونور الأبصار وضيائها، وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين الصادقين. الحمد لله الذي جعلنا من المتمسكين بولاية سيدي ومولاي علي بن أبي طالب. الحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله. أما بعد، يقول الله في كتابه الكريم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم، والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. The first of our loud salawat in honor of Rasulullah Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. The second in honor of Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib. The third in honor of Imam Sahib al-Asr wal-Zaman. At the same time, we'd like to welcome Brother Philip, the High Commissioner of the United Kingdom to Tanzania. Let's welcome him with a loud salawat. Allah. Respected scholars, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh. The holy month of Ramadan is a month of spirituality and reform, and at the same time is a month of peace and prosperity. Furthermore, in this month we honor some of the greatest personalities in Islamic history, as well as some of the greatest events in Islamic history. For example, in this month we honor the martyrdom of Amir al-Mu'mineen in a few nights, as well as at the same time we honor the birth of the grandson of the Prophet, Imam Hassan. At the same time we honor the death of the mother of believers, Khadija. And therefore, when we honor these personalities, we seek to take from the lessons and apply them into our own life. At the same time, in this holy month, we find that some of the greatest events in Islamic history occurred. For example, in a few nights, you have the Night of Power. But as well, in this holy month, we honor the first battle in the religion of Islam, known as the Battle of Badr. The Battle of Badr is a battle which unfortunately has been neglected by many Islamic circles. For while many Muslims know it is the first battle in the religion of Islam, many Muslims underestimate the importance of this battle and its position in history. For like any battle, there is a need for us to study the background of the battle, as well as study the reasons why the battle took place, the events which occurred, and the reason the Prophet Muhammad defended the Islamic State at the time, as well as the aftermath of this battle, in order that we are able to gain from the lessons and apply them into our own life today. For as we know, the Battle of Badr was used by many Muslims many years after the battle had taken place, in the sense that many Muslims would remind themselves of the greatness of this battle. For example, you found that many companions who took part in that battle would come forward and say that they were a Badri. Badri meaning that they were part of that battle. Likewise, many would point and say that that person took part in the Battle of Badr. Likewise, you would find that the Khalifa Ammar ibn al-Khattab would base his economic policy on those who fought at the Battle of Badr and those who came later, those who converted to Islam before the Battle of Badr and those who converted later. And therefore the battle had a major place within Islamic history. Likewise, you find Imam Zayn al-Abidin salawatullah wa salamu alayhi, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad, in his famous sermon in Syria in front of the empire of Yazid, comes forward and states that I am the son of the one who fought at Badr and Hunayn. And then later on in the sermon says, I am the son of the one who was a Mekki and a Madani, a Badri and a Uhudi. Highlighting and emphasizing on the idea that his grandfather, Ali ibn Abi Talib, was amongst those who fought at the Battle of Badr. And that's why we also find that the Khalifa Umar bin Abdul Aziz stopped the cursing of Ali ibn Abi Talib when he found out what position Ali ibn Abi Talib had in the Battle of Badr. Therefore, there is a need for us to study this battle, because it was a battle which occurred on the 17th of Ramadan in the second year after the migration of the Holy Prophet to Medina. And that means that it's on a night like tonight that the battle actually occurred. When we examine the battle, there is a need for us to examine the background of the battle. And that is where we begin. You see, the background of the battle is that the battle occurred in the second year after the migration. As we know, the Prophet Muhammad became a prophet at the age of 40. 13 years of his prophethood was in Mecca, and the remainder was in Medina, the remaining 10. In those first 13 years, while he was in Mecca, him and his companions received much oppression from the paganistic circles of the Arabs. In the sense that, like any monotheistic religion which preaches the belief in one God, they went through a period of severe oppression. Because what we find is that likewise in Christianity and likewise in Judaism, because they were monotheistic religions, they faced periods of oppression from the ruling classes. And that the same with the Prophet Muhammad, that him and his companions for 13 years in Mecca, from his age of 40 until the age of 53, faced severe oppression and severe torture. For example, you had companions like Bilal, who were tortured simply because they were a black slave who joined the religion of Islam. You had people like Ammar bin Yasir, whose parents Yasir and Sumayya were executed because of their belief in the religion of Islam. You had many others who were tortured severely. The Prophet himself would go down in prostration in his prayer and would be at the end of an intestine of an animal from Abu Jahl thrown at him while he is in his prostration. To the extent that even in the middle of his prophethood, many of his companions had to leave Arabia and go towards Africa in order that they received sanctuary from the Christian priest named as Najashi. Yet the Prophet Muhammad, in these 13 years of his prophethood in Mecca, never once retaliated to this oppression, in that his Lord never once sent him a revelation to retaliate to the oppression that he faced. And that's why eventually he had to leave Mecca and go towards Medina, because at the end of those 13 years, the Meccans sought to kill him on what was known as the night of the migration. He managed to leave Mecca and went to Medina, and went to Medina to build the Islamic State. When he went to Medina, he was 53 years of age. And 53 years of age, he had still not fought a single battle in the religion of Islam. So from the age of 40 until the age of 53, there was not a single battle whatsoever. And even when he reached Medina, they were still trying to attack him. And still there was no battle until the second year of his ministry in Medina. You see, when he had reached Medina, the Arabs were extremely angry that he was able to leave Mecca without being killed. And they were angry that he had reached Medina for 3 different reasons. The first reason was that they were unhappy that a fellow Arab tribe was willing to welcome him into Medina. Because as you know, the 2 main tribes of Medina were the Aus and the Khazraj. The Aus and the Khazraj for many years had been fighting each other. But when the Prophet Muhammad came towards them, they eventually not only managed to unite, but they also came towards the religion of Islam. Therefore, on the first level, the Arabs of Mecca were unhappy that Muhammad had Arabs who were willing to welcome him in Medina, number 1. Number 2, they were unhappy because the economic stranglehold that they had over Mecca had now diminished. In the sense that now, the economic stranglehold in Arabia was shared between the people of Mecca and the people of Medina, because now the Prophet Muhammad was building an Islamic state in Medina. Number 3, they were unhappy that the Prophet Muhammad had managed to convert many of their sons and daughters towards the religion of Islam. That many of the great leaders of Arabia, people like Utbah ibn Rabi'ah, the father of Hind, the wife of Abu Sufyan, his son Hanzala, the brother of Hind, had gone to Medina with Rasulullah. He had gone to Medina with the Prophet. Therefore you found that many of the aristocrats of Arabia were unhappy that their fellow brethren had now joined Muhammad and gone to Medina. And this meant that many of these Arabs would not rest. As in people like Abu Jahl said that I will not rest until I kill Muhammad. Even though the Prophet Muhammad had never once retaliated to anything he had done, he said if it means that I have to chase Muhammad to Medina, I'll chase him. And that's why Abu Jahl used to stay on the outskirts of Medina. He would attack the caravans of the immigrants, the Muhajirun. He would also come and attack their villages, their crops, their gardens. And yet many of them, when they would come to the Prophet and say, can we retaliate to what he is doing? The Prophet said, no. Remain patient in this period. I will not retaliate until my Lord gives me a message. Therefore, the Prophet Muhammad had known that they were trying in many ways to attack Medina. Until at the beginning of Jamadi al-Awwal, in the Islamic calendar, the Prophet Muhammad had heard that Abu Sufyan had mobilized the caravan to go towards Syria. Because as you know, the Arabs used to have two different directions in terms of their trade. In the summertime, they would go towards Syria, and in the wintertime, they would go towards the Yemen. They would go for a month or so, collect a certain amount of profit and expenditure, and then return back towards Mecca. The Prophet Muhammad had heard that Abu Sufyan, one of the main people who used to attack Islam at the beginning, he had heard that Abu Sufyan was now going towards Syria and was on his way back, ready to mobilize an army, having bought weapons from Syria. So what did the Prophet Muhammad do? He told his companions at the beginning, he told Talha, and in another narration it says he told Adi ibn Hatim. He said to him, I want you to go and find out, investigate, what exactly has Abu Sufyan returned with from Syria. And so what happened was that Talha went to investigate, and then he came back to the Prophet. You see, the Prophet did not want to attack. The Prophet's aim was that I want to know what is this caravan made up of. Talha came back, he said the caravan number 1 is headed by Abu Sufyan, and around it, it has 40 guards. It is made up of 50,000 dirham and made up of 1,000 camels. And he has bought much artillery from Syria to come back towards Mecca. When the Prophet Muhammad heard this, he told his companions, it is our role to go and stop this caravan. Because in the same way he attacks our caravans, when we have got everything peaceful, now it is our role to go and stop this caravan. For if this caravan reaches Mecca, the Meccans will mobilize an army against us. When the news reached Abu Sufyan that there is a possibility of an ambush from the people of Medina, Abu Sufyan called his servant by the name of Zamzam. He had a servant by the name of Zamzam. He said to him, Zamzam, come near me. I want you to go quickly towards Mecca with your camel. He said to him, why? He said, I want you to go, and when you reach there, just before you reach there, pierce the nose of your camel, cut the ears of your camel, tear your shirt, show that there is some blood, and then enter upon the people of Mecca and say that Muhammad and his people have attacked our caravan and that they have attacked me. Did Rasulullah even come near the caravan? No, he didn't. But the idea was that if you go and spread a rumor within Mecca that Muhammad has attacked us, the people of Mecca would gain anger and they would rise against the Prophet. Zamzam went back into Mecca. He entered upon Mecca. When he entered, he called out, "O people of Mecca, come, I have news from the caravan of Abu Sufyan." Many of the caravan came. They said, "What's the news?" He said, "The caravan of Abu Sufyan has been attacked by Muhammad and his companions. Look at me. My shirt is torn. My camel has been attacked. Surely you will not accept this." An Arab does not like to lose money. And they had shares in this caravan. As soon as they heard that their caravan had been attacked, even though it had not even been touched, straight away Abu Jahl rose. And he said, "Are you people going to accept that Muhammad and his companions attack our caravans? All of us will now rise. I will take 1,000 soldiers. And I will take 700 horses and camels. And we will have a merry feast and a great time finishing Muhammad." Rasulullah at the same time was in Medina. The Prophet Muhammad told his companions that we have to go towards the caravan of Abu Sufyan. At this stage, the Prophet Muhammad does not know that Abu Sufyan has already sent a rumor that the caravan has been attacked. The Prophet called his companions. He said, how many of us are willing to go and stop this caravan? 80 of the immigrants, the Muhajirun, said, oh Muhammad, we will be with you. 233 of the people of Medina said, we will be with you. A total of 313 from Medina left with the Prophet Muhammad. When they left, they went towards a southwest village of Medina called Badr. You see, Badr was the southwest area of Medina. They went towards the southern west area, and when they reached there, the Prophet Muhammad told them to stop there. He said to Ali ibn Abi Talib, he said to him, go towards the wells of Badr. Find out for us if the caravan of Abu Sufyan has come or not. Ali ibn Abi Talib went towards the wells of Badr. When he came towards the wells of Badr, he found 3 of the Arabs talking to each other. 2 of them were saying, get ready, we need to fight. The army is coming. Ali ibn Abi Talib said, what did you say? They said, we said nothing. They tried to walk away, he caught them. He said, hold on, what did you just say? They said, well, there's an army which is coming. He said, come with me, both of you. He took someone from Banu Hajjaj, and he took the other from the tribe of Bani al-As. He said, come with me towards the Prophet Muhammad. Prophet Muhammad said, who are these 2? He said, these 2 were speaking of a war. The Prophet Muhammad said, which war? And Ibn Abi Talib said to them, explain. They came forward and they said, there is an army coming from Mecca. Have you not heard the news? The Prophet Muhammad said, why are they coming? They said, because there is a rumor going around that you have ambushed their caravan, and the Meccans are not happy about this. The Prophet Muhammad said, we haven't ambushed anyone's caravan. We haven't even seen Abu Sufyan's caravan. This moment, the Prophet Muhammad realized that a rumor had been sent which was a false rumor. But the Prophet Muhammad at this moment was in a predicament. Why? Because all he had alongside him was 313 soldiers. As he looked around, he saw that he had 80 from the Muhajirun, 233 from the Ansar. So he looked around and thought, well, the army of Mecca is going to be at least 1,000. Whereas our army is only made up of 313. The first thing he did was ask both groups of his soldiers whether they were willing to defend their land. So first he asked his companions. He said, what do you think? Abu Bakr came forward. He said, Ya Rasulallah, do not fight the Arabs. The Arabs are people of great glory. They have never been defeated. Do not fight them. It is better that we return back to our homeland. Umar ibn al-Khattab said exactly the same thing. Then Miqdad al-Aswad stood up. He said, O Prophet of God, you are the one who made us submit to God. And we gave our hearts to God through you. We went through years of torture without once raising our sword against these people, because you told us to remain patient. O Prophet of God, we will not be like the children of Israel when they said to Moses, go you and your Lord, we will stay behind at home. No, we will say, go you and your Lord, and we will be with you and your Lord. Rasulullah looked at him. He saw the passion that was there in Miqdad, but Rasulullah still had to ask the people of Medina. Miqdad was from the Muhajirun. He now had to ask the people of Medina. Why? Because when they told him to come to Medina, their pledge to the Prophet Muhammad was, all we're going to do is defend you. They never pledged to him that we're going to fight with you in a war. So he called their leader, Sa'ad ibn Mu'adh. He said to him, Sa'ad, I want to ask you, are the soldiers of Medina ready to be alongside me? Sa'ad said, Ya Rasulallah, if it means we have to drown in the sea alongside you, we will be alongside you. At this moment, the verse was revealed in the Quran, which gave the philosophy of why the Prophet Muhammad had to defend himself. And I'd like you to listen to this verse carefully. Because unfortunately in the media today, we do not find this verse being portrayed. Rather, we find verses which are taken completely out of context. You see, the verse which was revealed to the Prophet Muhammad was chapter 22 of the Quran, verse 39 and 40. أذن للذين يقاتلون بأنهم ظلموا. وَإِنَّ اللَّهَ عَلَى نَصْرِهِمْ لَقَدِيرٌ الَّذِينَ أُخْرِجُوا مِنْ دِيَارِهِمْ بِغَيْرِ حَقٍّ إِلَّا أَنْ يَقُولُوا رَبُّنَا اللَّهُ وَلَوْلَا دَفْعُ اللَّهِ النَّاسَ بَعْضَهُم بِبَعْضٍ لَهُدِّمَتْ صَوَامِعُ وَبِيَعٌ وَصَلَوَاتٌ وَمَسَاجِدُ. Please listen to the wording. What is the translation? Permission has been given to those who have been oppressed to defend themselves. And Allah will make them victorious. The only reason they were kicked out of their area was because they said there is only one God. We have given permission to our Prophet Muhammad to rise and defend himself, because if he doesn't, there will not be a single mosque, church or synagogue on the whole earth. If the religion of Islam was only about mosques, why does Allah say that the churches and the synagogues are to be defended? Because the reason the Prophet Muhammad rose in the Battle of Badr was to defend any institution which believed in monotheism and one God. Not just Islam. The Christians were being oppressed. The Jews were being oppressed. The Muslims were being oppressed. The Prophet Muhammad, God ordered him to rise and defend, because he said, if you do not, there will not be a single religion on earth which worships one God. The Prophet Muhammad marched towards Badr. He was at Badr. He camped at Badr. When he camped, he wanted to camp on the area where there was soft ground. One of his companions came towards him. His name was Habab. He came, he said, "O Prophet of God, may I ask a question?" The Prophet of God said, "Go ahead." He said, "O Prophet of God, where you've decided to camp, is it your decision or has it been revealed to you by God?" He said, "No, it's my decision. This is not from God." He said, "O Prophet of God, may I give you an advice? Because I am an expert on the desert area and where somebody should camp." Look at the Prophet Muhammad. He's not a dictator. He allows people to offer the advice. So he said, "Go ahead." He said, "O Prophet of God, don't rest your soldiers on the soft area. Rest your soldiers on the area which is more firm. And rest them on the area where they are close to the wells of Badr. Because the worst thing for any soldier is to be thirsty in the desert at the time of war. If you rest them on the area of high ground, then the water will be accessible to them in an easier way, for you are near the wells of Badr." He said, "This sounds very good. Let's go ahead with this." They camped themselves near the wells of Badr. At the same time, there is an understanding that the Prophet Muhammad would never have been victorious was it not for help from his Lord. Why? Because the first thing the Quran says Allah helped his soldiers with, even though they were only 313, He helped them. The first thing was that He allowed them to sleep easily in the night. Because you know, a soldier is tense the night of battle. You are thinking about your opposition, especially when you hear your opposition is 3 times greater than you are. So Allah says in the Quran, "I allowed you to rest in peace on the night of the battle." Number 1. Number 2, Allah says in the Quran, "We sent for you an abundance of rain." Why? Because where they had camped out was still quite firm ground. So Allah sent rain, so that became softer ground. Then number 2, the reason the rain was sent was that they would have an abundance of water and that they would be able to purify themselves as well in the middle of the night. Therefore they came forward with their soldiers. The opposition had now come forward and they had camped around the area. When the opposition came forward, they came in a very arrogant mood. The Arab leaders came with a very arrogant mood, as in you had people like Abu Jahl saying, "We do not need our main soldiers to fight. Let our slaves fight and they'll destroy the army of Muhammad." You see, this type of arrogance before war is not healthy. You go in overconfident against a group who are much smaller than you, but with much more desire and passion than you. Did all the leaders come to the battle from the Arabs? No, not all of them. Abu Lahab didn't come. Why? Abu Lahab was too lazy to come. He said, "I cannot be bothered going to war." So do you know what he did? He had a slave of his. He said, "I'll give you 4,000 dirhams. You go and fight on my behalf." Who hires a slave to fight on their behalf? The slave who he hired was Al-As ibn Hashim. He said to him, I'll give you 4,000 dirhams if you return from war. True Arab, they know how to deal. He knows he's not going to come back, so the money will stay in his pocket. Then number two, there was another one who just about came to war. Who was he? Umayyah ibn Khalaf. Umayyah ibn Khalaf was the man who tortured Bilal all his years. Bilal was the black slave. He was his slave until the day Bilal said, I do not follow your Arab aristocracy. Rather, I follow a religion where the black and the white is equal before God. When he said this, Umayyah bin Khalaf used to torture him on the sandhills of Arabia by placing hot black rocks on his body. Until eventually Bilal managed to be released. Umayyah bin Khalaf wasn't going to come to war. Why? Because he feared that Islam may defeat. And he feared the prophecy of the Prophet Muhammad, that one day he would be killed at the hands of Islam. So one day he was sitting before the battle in Mecca. Someone came towards him and said, Umayyah, here's some kuhl, some mascara. He said to him, why are you giving it to me? He said, you might as well act like a woman, considering you're not coming with the rest of us to war. At this moment, Umayyah said, how dare you say that to me? He said to him, you tortured many of Muhammad's soldiers when they didn't do anything wrong to us. And now when we want to attack them, you are sitting behind? Umayyah said, I'll never sit behind. Give me my sword, I'll rise and I'll fight against them. They mobilized all the main generals and they now came towards Badr. Again, Allah says in the Quran how He helped the Muslims. You know what He said? He said that I made the Muslims, even though they were small, look like a large number. And I made the opposition, even though they were great, look like a small number. So that the Muslims felt confident when they were looking at the opposition. It came towards the moment of battle. Before the battle, Utbah ibn Rabi'ah, the father of Hind, he heard that Abu Sufyan's caravan had reached Mecca. So he said, why are we fighting Muhammad when the rumor was a false rumor? Muhammad hasn't touched any of our caravans. Abu Sufyan has reached Mecca. Why don't we just go home and leave Muhammad? Do you know why he said that? Because his son Hanzala was with the Prophet Muhammad. He was scared there was going to be a moment where he may have to kill his own son. So he said to Abu Jahl, he said, let's just go home, leave Muhammad. Abu Jahl said, are you a coward? Is it just because your son is in the opposition, your heart has now broken? Utbah, because of the Arab arrogance that he had, said, no, I am not a coward. I do not care even if I have to kill my own son. And so this arrogance which they had led them towards the battlefield. Utbah, the father of Hind, please do not forget whose father he was. Because later on in history, revenge occurs. Utbah came forward. When he came forward, he said that I am Utbah, son of Rabi'ah. In those days, the Arabs, when they would fight, the beginning of the war would be a combat, 3 versus 3. Utbah bin Rabi'ah came forward. He said, I am Utbah bin Rabi'ah. On my left is my son Walid. And on my right is my brother Shayba. O soldiers of Muhammad, show us your greatest soldiers. Hamza came forward, the uncle of the Prophet. He came forward, he said, I am Hamza, son of Abd al-Muttalib. On my right hand side is Ubaydullah. On my left hand side is Ali, son of Abu Talib. When they came forward, it was now time for the one-on-one combat. You see, there's an army of 1,000 in front of you. But to be a warrior, it's not about the quantity of the opposition. It's rather about the quality of what you have inside yourself. Hamza came forward. Ali ibn Abi Talib came forward. Ubaydullah came forward. Hamza managed to kill who was in front of him, Shayba. Ali ibn Abi Talib managed to kill both Utbah and Walid. That's why he tells Muawiyah at the beginning of the battle of Siffin, O Muawiyah, why don't you come out and fight me one-on-one? Do not forget what I did to your maternal grandparents and uncle at Badr. come out and fight me, so I'll do to you what I done to them at Badr as well. In that battle, when it ensued, they say Ali ibn Abi Talib on that day was like a lion on the battlefield. To the extent that Sa'ad ibn Abi Waqqas was asked, what happened on the day of Badr? He said the day of Badr belonged to Ali ibn Abi Talib. He said to him, why? They said to him, why? He said, because Ali ibn Abi Talib, on the beginning of the battle, he said these lines. He said, I will never forget them. He said, what did he say? He said, كأني جني لمثل هذا أولدتني أمي. He said, I am like someone who is possessed. It is for a day like this that my mother gave birth to me. This is my day. Leave me on the battlefield alone with all of them. That's why Imam al-Shafi'i says, a person from the tribe of Banu Kinana came towards Muawiyah. He said, Muawiyah, were you there on the day of Badr? He said, yes, I was. He said to him, did you fight? He said, no, I prefer to stay at the back and watch what was happening. He then said to him, how was Ali ibn Abi Talib on the day of Badr? He said, Ali ibn Abi Talib was a lion roaring through the soldiers. He said it was like he had eyes on the back of his head. Nobody could get in his way, even though on that day he was only 21 years old. Yet on that day, he was a youth who valiantly defended his cousin and his prophet. Because on that day, he was the one who was the standard bearer. He led the army. The Badr army, even though they had the greatest of soldiers, could not believe that an army of 313 was defeating an army of 1,000. On that day, two of their greatest leaders were killed. Who? The first person who was killed was Abu Jahl. The same Abu Jahl who for years tortured the Prophet Muhammad. For years he killed many of the innocent monotheists of Arabia. The same Abu Jahl died a death which really was an embarrassment. Because there are many who've died deaths in honor. But this man died a death which showed you exactly how arrogant he was. Do you know why? Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, when he was at the beginning of the battle, he came to the Prophet. He said, O Rasulullah, O Prophet of God, I am a very short man. He was only about 4'6". It doesn't help when you're short on the battlefield. He said, I am a short man. Ali ibn Abi Talib, Hamza, these are all great generals. Ya Rasulullah, look how short I am. What am I meant to do on this battlefield? The Prophet Muhammad told him, if you see any of the opposition leaders, the ones who have ambushed our caravans, tortured our women, executed our children, if you see any of them, when they are about to die, you go and finish them off. Abdullah bin Mas'ud was waiting. He was waiting to see if any of those opposition leaders were about to die. He saw Abu Jahl on the ground, but he hadn't died. Abdullah bin Mas'ud ran. He thought, this is my moment. I can't fight the 6'4" and the 7'1". I'll fight. This Abu Jahl is on the ground. He came towards attacking Abu Jahl. Abu Jahl was in his last moments. Yet look how arrogant he is. He's on the ground lying. Abdullah bin Mas'ud is coming, about to strike him. Abu Jahl looks at him. He says, I don't want you to kill me. Abdullah bin Mas'ud says, why? He goes, I cannot take it that I am killed by one of the shortest men of their soldiers. Let one of the tall ones kill me, not the short one. That's why the Prophet Muhammad said, Abu Jahl was more arrogant than Pharaoh. Because Pharaoh, at least when he was drowning in the Red Sea, said that now I believe in a God. Whereas Abu Jahl, when he was dying, was more concerned about the height of his killer. Likewise, at the same time, who else was killed? Umayyah ibn Khalaf, the man who tortured the black Bilal. Umayyah ibn Khalaf was fighting. He saw that the other generals were dying. He tried to run away. He saw Abdul Rahman ibn Auf. When he saw Abdul Rahman bin Auf on that day was a Muslim. But previously he used to be a polytheist. He saw Abdul Rahman. He said to him, Abdul Rahman, me and you were friends before. Come on, find me a way and get me out. Would you believe Abdul Rahman bin Auf? You'd think he would have said to him, a man like you, who kills innocent human beings, should never be let go. No, Abdul Rahman said, don't worry, come, I'll find you a place. Bilal saw him. He said, I'll never let you take Umayyah. For years, Umayyah tortured me in the heat of Arabia. Simply because I said there is only one God, I will not let him go. He managed to catch Umayyah and he managed to eventually avenge what Umayyah had done. Eventually, the opposition of Mecca ran away from the Battle of Badr. They all ran away and the Muslims were victorious. In the way when the Muslims were victorious, the Muslims on that day had lost 14 of their soldiers. The opposition had lost 70 out of 1,000. Out of those 70, Ali ibn Abi Talib had killed 35. 50% of those in the Battle of Badr were from Amir al-Mu'mineen. 50 prisoners were caught. When these 50 prisoners were caught, the Prophet Muhammad asked his soldiers, what should we do to these prisoners? The barbaric ones amongst them, I don't need to mention their names, they said, kill them. They were from the opposition, kill them. Then Abu Bakr came forward and said, no, why should we kill them? Ransom them. They are prisoners, let's ransom them. The Prophet Muhammad said, you are right, we will ransom them. So they said, oh Prophet, how are we going to ransom them? He said, the first thing you do, I do not want to see any ropes on the hands of any of the prisoners we have caught. Because I do not like to see a human being who has been caught as a prisoner with his hands roped. Untie the rope, number one. Then they said, what else? He said, number two, feed them what you eat. Number three, clothe them with that which you wear. Number four, let them live in your houses and treat them equally. Then they said, but the Prophet, after we do all of these, how do we ransom them? He said, you ransom them in this one area. They said, what is it? He said, if the prisoners are able to teach 10 Muslim children how to read and write, they are then to be released. You see, the Prophet Muhammad wanted to build a state of education. He didn't think retaliation, now that we've got prisoners, we should make a fool of them. No. He said, each of these prisoners, do they know how to read and write? They said, yes. He said, many of our children are illiterate. If they teach 10 of our children how to read and how to write, then release them straight away and let them go back to their families. Imagine, if the Prophet Muhammad spread his religion by the sword, wouldn't he have got all of these and just beheaded each one? Those who come forward today with the slogans of jihad do not follow originally what the Prophet Muhammad taught on the day of Badr. Therefore, on the first level, he allowed the prisoners to be ransomed. Then number two, he said, from the opposition, there are soldiers who were compelled to fight. They were coerced into fighting. Some of them are good human beings. For example, the Prophet Muhammad's own uncle, Abbas, was from the opposition soldiers. Abbas was caught by a person called Abu Yasir. When he was caught, he was brought towards the Prophet Muhammad. The Prophet Muhammad said, even though he is my uncle, you must put them all in a separate area. All of them have to be kept in this area. Then in the middle of the night, he heard the groans and the moans of his uncle. He then woke up and said, I cannot take to see a member of my family. Even though he's from the opposition, he was compelled to be amongst them. Release my uncle, and for that matter, release all the others who were compelled to fight, even though they did not want to. The Prophet Muhammad allowed them to be released. That was the second area. The third area was that the Prophet Muhammad collected many of the spoils of war. After every war that you have, there are spoils. But some of his companions, the Prophet Muhammad showed they were not fighting sincerely. They were only fighting to collect the spoils of war. To the extent that when the Prophet Muhammad got the spoils of war, when he was about to share them out, one of his companions, Sa'ad bin Abi Waqqas, looked at the Prophet Muhammad and said to him, are you going to give me the same as one of these water carriers and gardeners when I am from the tribe of Bani Zuhra? The Prophet Muhammad said to him, haven't we removed this inequality and this injustice? What do you mean you are from this tribe and they are from this tribe? All of you should have come sincerely to this battle, not because you want to collect the spoils of war, but rather because you seek to remove injustice and oppression from Arabia. Therefore you found that some of his own companions were bickering over the spoils of war instead of being happy that they had brought victory to justice and removal of oppression. Therefore, on this third area, he said, Abdullah ibn Ka'ab, come next to me. Abdullah came. He said, Abdullah, you are the one who will give out the spoils of war. Look at Ali ibn Abi Talib. Even though he was the main victor in that Badr, he never once came to Rasulullah and said, I want all the spoils of war because I am the greatest soldier. No. He just held back and said, oh Rasulullah, have we managed to remove oppression? Rasulullah said, yes. He said, that's enough for me. I don't need any spoils of war. I did not come to the battlefield to look for the spoils of war. Even Rasulullah saw one of the people of Arabia, one of the great economic ministers of Arabia in the battle. He saw him, but he noticed he wasn't fighting. When he was caught as a prisoner, the Prophet Muhammad said, let him go. Some of his companions said, oh Prophet of God, why should we let him go? He was one of the opposition. He said, no. The man was coming here with no intention to fight us. He has never harmed any of us when we were in Mecca. And a person should not bear the burden of what others have done. Let him go. And so he allowed the companion to be released. That's why the Quran says, O Prophet of God, on that day you were victorious because we assisted you with angels from the heaven. 313 can never defeat 1,000. But God in the Quran, in Surah 8, He says, I assisted the Prophet Muhammad with 1,000 angels. Some come forward and say there's a contradiction. Why? Because Surah 3 of the Quran says we assist you with 3,000. And Surah 8 says we assisted you with 1,000. So the reply is that there isn't a contradiction. God assisted the Prophet Muhammad with 1,000 angels. And in that verse said, I am willing to send you another 3,000 if I want. Meaning that there is no end to the supply of God when His chosen servants on earth seek to protect the message of the religion of monotheism. And that's why some people came forward and asked, did these angels come and fight alongside the Prophet Muhammad? No, they didn't. The angels in the Battle of Badr did not fight. The only reason they were alongside the Prophet Muhammad was to give certainty to the minority. That in any land, the minority can always defeat the majority if the majority represents injustice. They only came to give certainty to the hearts of the believers. That, oh believers, your minority is a majority in the eyes of Allah, for Allah will give you soldiers to assist you. Upon the return, one of the proofs of the stepdaughters of Rasulullah, Zainab. Remember we were discussing that she is a stepdaughter. This Zainab, her husband, Abil As ibn Rabi' was with the opposition at the time. He was caught. She came to the Prophet Muhammad. She said, O Prophet of God, my husband has been caught and I am your stepdaughter. Will you not release him? Now listen to the discussion. He said to her, for what? She said, I'm willing to give away the necklace that my mother Khadija left for me as an inheritance. So Rasulullah took the necklace. He said to his companions that this Zainab wants her husband to be released. She is willing to ransom her necklace to the treasury of the Islamic State. The soldier said, we do not mind, O Prophet of God. And so her husband was released. Do you know why this is important? Because it is a proof that you can use for the event of Fadak. Why? Because Ibn Abil Hadid in Sharh Nahj al-Balagha, do you know what he says? He says, I was having a discussion with my teacher, Abu Ja'far al-Alawi. Abu Ja'far al-Alawi said, did you hear about Zainab, the stepdaughter of Rasulullah, when she gave away her necklace so her husband could be freed? He said, yes, I did. He said, her husband, what was it that he was ransomed with? He said, I said that it's a necklace. He said, where did she get this necklace from? He said, the necklace was from her inheritance from her father Rasulullah and her mother Khadija. So he said, if Zainab can inherit from her father and her mother, why couldn't Fatima al-Zahra inherit Fadak from her father and her mother? Therefore you found that the Battle of Badr was seen as the greatest victory in the religion of Islam. A victory where a group of 313 were united with each other. Therefore the first message is the message of being united in the Muslim world. Unfortunately in the Muslim world today we have Sunni and Shia bickering over petty issues. when the reality is that all of them should come and unite with each other. Number two is the importance as a Muslim or as a Christian or as a Jew to always have trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and to always defend the monotheistic religions which God put on this earth. Number three, the importance of the number 313. That in the same way, the first battle of Islam was fought with 313 soldiers. In the same way, at the end of time, when the Messiah returns with the Prophet Jesus, they will return with an army of 313. We pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to raise us with the army of the Prophet of God, and to allow us to be amongst those who remove injustice in all its forms in the world today, to allow us to remove oppression, to help us to allow those who are weak and oppressed in the earth to rise. Oh God, allow the religions of the world to unite. Allow the monotheistic religions to come together, to stand up for justice and to remove all forms of tyranny. Oh God, allow us to bring the monotheistic religions in dialogue with each other in order that they are able to understand the stand that there is no God but God. We pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with the Surah Al-Fatiha, but before it the loudest of salawat.